Jake, a seasoned hiker, thrived in solitude. The wilderness was his sanctuary, a place to escape the daily grind. He'd conquered countless trails, each step a victory. But Devil's Ridge Trail, nestled deep within Black Hollow National Forest, whispered a siren song. This infamous path promised not just adventure, but a brush with the unknown. Legends spoke of vanished hikers, their fates shrouded in mystery. Some whispered of the forest's unforgiving nature, swallowing them whole. Others spoke of a darker presence, something sinister lurking among the ancient trees. These tales, passed down through generations, painted a chilling picture of Devil's Ridge, a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurred. The stories of Devil's Ridge were more than just campfire tales. Locals spoke in hushed tones, their voices tinged with fear and respect. They recounted strange occurrences, unexplained noises, and a palpable sense of dread that clung to the trail. Some spoke of a malevolent entity, a guardian of the forest, fiercely protective of its domain. Hikers who dared to venture into its depths often returned shaken, their tales laced with unease. They spoke of being watched, followed by an unseen presence. Their stories served as a warning, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurked within the forest's embrace. The very air seemed to hum with unspoken secrets, a symphony of whispers that sent shivers down the spines of those who dared to listen. Jake, however, scoffed at these tales. A man of logic and reason, he dismissed them as folklore, mere superstition designed to ward off the faint of heart. Armed with his compass, map, and unwavering skepticism, he set out to conquer Devil's Ridge. His goal was twofold: to experience the trail's rugged beauty and to debunk the myths that clung to it like morning mist. He believed in the tangible, the evidence he could hold in his hands. The whispers of the unknown held no power over him. He would conquer Devil's Ridge, not with fear, but with a scientist's curiosity. Little did he know the forest had its own plans, a sinister welcome waiting for those brave or foolish enough to enter its domain. The morning mist hung heavy as Jake stepped onto the Devil's Ridge Trail. Sunlight, muted by the thick fog, cast an ethereal glow upon the towering pines. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles, a sensory cocktail that usually invigorated him. But today, an unfamiliar heaviness pressed down on him, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. He shook off the feeling, attributing it to the legends he'd heard. This was his domain, the wilderness he knew like the back of his hand. He adjusted his backpack, the familiar weight settling comfortably on his shoulders, and pulled out his camera. "Day 1, Devil's Ridge," he murmured, his voice echoing strangely in the stillness. "Let's see what secrets you hold." As Jake ventured deeper into the woods, the forest seemed to close in around him. The once familiar sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves faded, replaced by an unnerving silence. It was as if the forest itself were holding its breath, watching his every move. The trees, gnarled and ancient, loomed over the path, their branches intertwining overhead to form a dense canopy that blotted out the sun. He checked his compass, ensuring he was still on course, but a tremor of unease ran through him. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the sound of his own footsteps crunching on the dry leaves beneath his boots. It was as if the forest itself were a living entity, holding its breath, waiting for him to make a misstep. Hours passed, and the trail remained unchanged, a winding ribbon of dirt and stone cutting through the dense undergrowth. The silence pressed in on Jake like a physical weight. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow, scanning the woods. Then he noticed it, a faded backpack lying by the trail, its contents spilled onto the forest floor. Curiosity piqued. Jake approached cautiously. The pack was old, weathered by time. It was the type favored by experienced hikers. A shiver ran down his spine. Someone had been here before him. Kneeling down, Jake cautiously examined the backpack's contents. A battered canteen, a crumpled map, and a worn notebook lay scattered amongst the fallen leaves. The notebook, its cover barely clinging to its spine, drew his attention. Its pages, yellowed with age, were filled with frantic scribblings, the ink smudged as if written in haste. Curiosity overwhelming his unease, Jake picked up the notebook, his fingers tracing the faded ink. The words, scrawled in a handwriting that spoke of both fear and urgency, sent a chill down Jake's spine. "It watches," one entry read, "always lurking just beyond sight. Don't let it catch your gaze." Another, written in a shaky hand, simply said, "Don't look back. It knows when you're alone." Each sentence, each frantic word was like a whisper of madness echoing in the stillness of the forest. Jake's rational mind dismissed the notebook's contents as the ramblings of a frightened hiker, their sanity frayed by the solitude of the wilderness. Yet, a seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew with each step he took. The silence of the forest, once comforting, now seemed pregnant with unseen eyes, the rustling of leaves whispering his name. He found himself constantly turning, scanning the trees for any sign of movement, his senses on high alert. The deeper he ventured into the woods, the more pronounced the feeling of being watched became. It was a subtle sensation, a prickling at the back of his neck, a fleeting glimpse of movement in the periphery of his vision. Every creak of a branch, every sigh of the wind sent his heart racing, his hand instinctively reaching for the compass that hung around his neck. Determined to shake off the growing unease, Jake pulled out his camera, its familiar weight a comfort in the oppressive atmosphere. He pointed the lens at the trail ahead, capturing the play of light and shadow filtering through the dense canopy. "Just a trick of the light," he muttered, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. Nothing but trees and shadows. As he reviewed the footage, a cold dread gripped him. In the background, partially obscured by the trees and the swirling mist, stood a figure. Tall and slender, it blended into the scenery, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. Its back was to the camera, its head turned slightly as if watching him. Jake's blood ran cold. There had been no one there, he would have seen them. As the sun began its descent, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor, Jake set up camp, exhaustion weighing heavily upon him. He found a clearing and began pitching his tent. The routine did little to ease his anxiety. The forest, cloaked in twilight shadows, seemed to press in closer. He built a small fire, the flickering flames providing meager security. The wind howled through the trees, whispering secrets. Every snap of a twig sent shivers down his spine. The warmth of the fire did little to penetrate the growing chill that had settled deep within Jake's bones. The darkness beyond the fire's reach pulsed with unseen energy, alive with whispers and rustling movements that set his teeth on edge. He tried to focus on the crackling flames, on the comforting aroma of burning wood, but his senses remained on high alert, attuned to every subtle shift in the darkness that pressed in around him. The silence, broken only by the crackling fire, was suddenly pierced by a sound. A soft, sibilant whisper carried on the breeze. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a disembodied voice that sent a shiver down his spine. Jake strained to hear, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Jake!" the voice whispered, barely audible above the wind. The hair on the back of Jake's neck stood on end. He whipped his head around, his eyes scanning the impenetrable darkness beyond the firelight. The trees, their branches swaying rhythmically in the wind, seemed to mock his fear, their shadows dancing like phantoms in the flickering light. He could feel his pulse quicken, his breath catching in his throat. "Who's there?" he called out. his voice a shaky whisper that was swallowed by the vastness of the forest. The only response was the mournful sigh of the wind whistling through the trees like a mournful lament. It seemed to wrap around him, cold and ethereal, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else, something ancient and unknowable. The forest itself seemed to be breathing, inhaling and exhaling around him, its presence suffocating. Panic clawed at Jake's composure. He scrambled, eyes darting, searching for movement in the darkness. Clutching his flashlight, he felt the unseen terror. The forest had become a menacing labyrinth. He stumbled, sprawling onto the forest floor. He lay there, chest heaving, mind racing. Whispers grew louder, swirling around him. He was no longer alone. Something ancient and evil was toying with him. Scrambling to his feet, Jake fumbled for his backpack, his fingers closing around the familiar shape of his compass. The needle spun erratically, its movements frantic and unpredictable. Lost and disoriented, he stumbled through the darkness, whispers echoing around him. The forest stretched endlessly, a labyrinth with no exit. Every path led him back to the same haunting clearing. He was trapped, ensnared in a web of fear and shadows. The forest floor seemed to shift beneath Jake's feet, the once familiar path twisting and turning in on itself like a malevolent serpent. The trees, their branches gnarled and twisted, reached out towards him with skeletal fingers, their bark a canvas of grotesque faces contorted in silent screams. The air grew thick and heavy, filled with the cloying scent of decay and the oppressive weight of unseen eyes. Each step he took seemed to pull him deeper into the heart of the forest's madness, the whispers growing louder, more insistent, weaving their way into his thoughts, his fears. He could feel his sanity slipping, his grip on reality loosening with each breath he took. The line between the real and the unreal blurred, the boundaries of his world dissolving into a kaleidoscope of shadows and whispers. He stumbled through the undergrowth, his clothes torn, his body weary, his mind teetering on the precipice of madness. The whispers followed him relentlessly, echoing his name, his fears, his darkest thoughts. The forest floor was littered with the remnants of his sanity, discarded items from his backpack, each one a testament to his unraveling. He came to a sudden halt, his breath catching in his throat. Before him, shimmering in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the dense canopy, was a pool of water. Its surface was still, reflecting the distorted images of the trees around it like a shattered mirror. As he stared into its depths, he saw his reflection staring back at him. But it was not the reflection he knew. The reflection was a grotesque mockery of himself, his features twisted into a mask of fear and despair. Its eyes, wide and staring, burned with an unholy light, reflecting the madness that had taken root in his own soul. He stumbled back, his hand instinctively reaching for the hunting knife sheathed at his belt, but the reflection mimicked his every move, its lips curling into a cruel smile. A cold dread gripped him, paralyzing him with fear. He tried to speak, to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. He was trapped, caught in the gaze of his own unraveling, his sanity slipping away like sand through his fingers. The doppelganger in the pool reached out, its long, skeletal fingers beckoning him closer, promising him oblivion, promising him an end to the whispers, an end to the fear. Days bled into nights. The forest held its breath, its silence a shroud over the mystery of Jake's disappearance. Search parties, their hope dwindling with each passing hour, combed through the unforgiving terrain of Devil's Ridge. They called his name, their voices echoing through the silent trees, each unanswered call a hammer blow to the fading hope of finding him alive. The forest, however, offered no answers. no clues to Jake's fate. It stood there, ancient and indifferent, its trees whispering secrets only they knew. The searchers found no trace of him, no footprints, no campsites, no sign of his struggle. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, swallowed whole by the very wilderness he had sought to conquer. The only evidence of Jake's ordeal was his camera, found amidst the gnarled roots of an ancient tree. The forest seemed to return it, a chilling message from the heart of darkness. Authorities, grim-faced, watched the footage of Jake's final moments. Grainy and distorted, it showed Jake's terrified face, his eyes wide with unspeakable fear. No longer the confident hiker, he was broken, his spirit crushed by the forest's insidious power. And then they saw it. A shadowy figure behind Jake in the fog, tall, skeletal, with glowing eyes. It moved closer, enveloping Jake in darkness. And then, the screen went black.